Welcome to the my latest LinkedIn Live. And had I known that Mark was going to be in the car, I could have been in the car too, and we could have done LinkedIn coaches. You know, like they do the things for the cars and comedians. We could have done LinkedIn coaches and cars or all that stuff. But we're gonna have a great conversation today. And I think, and
Absolutely.
this is one of the things, and I know Brenda's talk about this too. You go with the flow here, and I know that we were logistically trying to figure stuff out, but it does. One of the things that we actually started chatting about right before, when I was in job search and I was passively looking, I was asked to take an interview, and I had to go to my car because I couldn't really do it there and have a conversation in the middle of it. It wasn't a Panera's, but it was actually a Starbucks.
Mm.
Uh, and I think it was a good experience. And I think one of the things that kind of told me is to always be prepared because you never know when something's going to come up.
Right.
So are you in Chicago right now?
I'm in Chicago right now, at least for one more day.
Okay.
And then tomorrow I'm out of here for 3 days and then I'm back. But yeah, I'm in Chicago on the south side of Chicago.
Uh-huh.
If there was a landmark, uh, I would say it's closer to White Sox Park than it is to Wrigley Field, which is the Chicago Cub. That one's like about an hour away from where I am, considering you having to drive all the roads that are uh, now. So
I mean, I've
yeah.
been to Chicago a few times. So, because when we're actually looking for colleges for my son, we went to University of Chicago, which I think is not too far from you,
Nope.
and we also went the other way to Northwestern. So I love the city
Mhm.
and the different areas of it. So I definitely, I think one of the things I got a real kick out of was seeing when we went there people swimming on Lake Michigan,
Mhm.
which never really occurred to me.
Yeah.
Um, but it's such a wonderful city, and I think the challenge for me, as I've been talking with you and other people, is with job search is there's two things. First of all, people are not representing themselves the way they think they should be. I had a
Right.
conversation with someone yesterday, and they told me what their job title was, and I said,
Mhm.
"Tell me what and I said, tell me a little bit about what you're looking for." And I said, "That's not really the job title I envisioned."
Mhm.
I said, "You have to be a little bit clear about what you're looking to do, because
Right.
I think we get caught up in that rut. We did this job title for a while, but it may not actually be what the job you're looking for."
Yeah. I agree. Something that I think people should be clearer definitely is, and you probably guessed that I'll say writing is probably the biggest thing, not even more so um, to kind of prepare you to talk. I
Mhm.
think when people talk about use their LinkedIn and they write their LinkedIn about section and even their headlines, there's still like misspelled words and there's uh, grammar, but even more so, there's not a target. Um, the better your target, the more opportunities you'll have, and let other people decide if you have transferable skills. Although you should be able to explain that too.
Right.
Sometimes there are jobs that we never even heard of that you might have opportunities before, but before that, you have to be able to explain what you currently understand and what you've currently been able to been able to apply and to
Right.
uh the bring solutions to and to give up.
I know from my standpoint, a couple of things came up in the last couple of days when I was working with job seekers. First of all, they told me that I said, "I don't see your picture on LinkedIn." And they said, "Well, my picture's on LinkedIn." I said, "Let's go through the settings together." And it turned out that they only had the picture on for first connections. So
Right.
that became an aha moment. And then last night I was working with someone, and I actually, I called up the profile, and it wasn't. And he said it's not the right profile. I said, "Are you
Mhm.
sure?" Well, it turns out he had two profiles, and one of the profiles he had was from a place that he no longer works at, and it's the one that he wants to be in sync. So I think part of it is even little things like that. Even before you can get to the actual idea of the job search by itself, you want to make sure you're portraying in the best light. So, question here from Merrill. I guess a couple of things. I mean, Lauren Oken is on the call. Um, Cubs or White Sox? So I'm gonna. Are you a White Sox fan or are you neither? Cubs or White?
Yeah, I'm a by default a White Sox fan by the way of the Yankees because I'm a New York native, so
Right, right, right.
I actually love the Yankees, but since they have a lot of the same motif, if you will, as far as colors, White Sox preferably over the Cubs. Although I've been to Cubs games,
Uh huh.
I've actually even had a friend who played for the Cubs once upon a time.
Okay.
But and that's the only time I cheered for the Cubs when he was active and no longer is. It's been a long time. But all that, yeah, White Sox. I've been to more White Sox games than Cubs.
So let me ask you a question. When someone asks you about portraying themselves in a
Mhm.
certain way, I like to say sometimes go to a LinkedIn job spec and see if it matches what you do. Um, Sometimes I talk to people about that. Any
Mhm.
certain suggestions? Because most people don't realize how they're portraying themselves. So I'm wondering if there's anything that you can suggest that they do as a starting point.
Well, there's a lot of value. Years ago, I think when we talked about when branding came up a lot more. Actually, I don't know if it's more now than then, but
Hmm.
asking people about who they think you are has a lot of value to it. And I think you have to be aware enough between who you say you are, between what your employer, who they think, or how do you serve them and how do you serve their clients, and who people around you say you are. And it's kind of a hybrid of all three.
Hmm.
But to be very clear about it, I think we get our idea of what we want to be mixed up with who we actually are. And I think that's where people don't have that kind of, they don't make the continuity really clear. So there should be some continuity between who you are, the way you appear at conferences and classes, if you do training, who you are there, and at work. I think there needs to be continuity with that as well. But if you have personas going on, that's something a little bit different. But I think that people just need to have that alignment because it really informs
Hmm.
present themselves in a very clear manner.
Oh, we just lost you for a second. Okay. I think for me, the hardest thing of all, and I actually shared the story today. My best friend worked for Mars, the candy people, for many, many years. And I never really knew what he did. I mean, I knew that he worked there and I knew he was a manager.
Right.
And I asked him to explain to me what he did.
Mhm.
And he had a hard time with that. What he did is he went through the tasks that he did and his day to day. And I said, Mark, what do you actually do? And I wasn't being facetious. I really wasn't. And he said, I'm a manager. I said, okay, what type of manager are you? I mean, and I was doing it in large part because I never knew what he did and people would ask me, but it was a learning experience because then he asked me the same question in reverse. And I said, well, this is what I do. And he said, no, you're telling me about the company. You're telling me about your day to day. What do you do? And I think that's a very hard thing to really for people to wrap themselves around.
It is. The spouses,
Yeah,
what they do, you get even a different story. I think it always fascinates me of how many people they're married and they can have a great job, but the spouse, they're not really tuned into what they actually do at the job. They know about the drama. They know about maybe some of the accomplishments if they've received bonuses based on those accomplishments or
right.
awards, but they're unclear about what their spouse actually do or even what their spouse actually represents with that job. That they can't answer the question, without my husband or without my wife, this company wouldn't be able to, and then that blank doesn't get filled in very often. But I think those are two elementary questions that people ask themselves, reverse engineer it to get
Mhm.
clarity. What would the company do without you? And it may come down to a task, but at least you have a starting point as to what makes you unique, rather than just somebody else who just puts the tops on bottles.
Right. You bring up a good point. It's like if I left a company, what would the company do without me? And or what did I bring to the company? And I think that's a big part of when you're portraying yourself.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's technical, sometimes it's not. Sometimes
Mhm.
it's a different viewpoint. Sometimes it's understanding things. And what I find a lot from people that have just lost their jobs also is they're so quick to put something down on a resume with their two or three things just to get out there without really thinking through. You can think through what you've done 9, 10 years ago a lot easier, but it's very hard for people to really think about that in real time. And I used to preach, keep track of your accomplishments, keep track if you have reviews, look at your reviews, get some ideas from them because it's a lot harder to do that when you're under the gun.
Yeah. I think lately, if probably in the past couple of years, I think the more people talk about how their job impacts the company or the department or their team, I think that would be a start in that for where people can present themselves a lot better. People really get wrapped up in their duties still, even after all these years. Back in the '80s, that's all people really cared about. Now to set apart 40 years later, you got to talk a lot more, including, what are your numbers? What are the things that the value you are bring to the position, and how do you impact the company? That's the next level in which you should be able to talk about. And I think it starts with, you know, and everybody can say that, you could be replaced at any time. That's not always true, because the way that you also deliver the impact and the way that you're able to measure it as well sets you apart. It's just that you've got to now make it known to other people. And
Mhm.
it doesn't start by the next job. It's going to start with your boss and your boss's boss. Um, I firmly believe that when people move along in their careers, they're not just having a dialogue with just the boss. They're having a dialogue with the boss's boss, and sometimes two or three levels up to make it to the next step. Even if you don't get promoted, at least you know how to interact, and you know how to have those conversations,
Def-
and for it to be a welcome conversation, not just something that you're just giving a report on.
So I do want to do some sports call outs here. I believe Lauren, Mama was a Cubs fan. Dad is White Sox. They both have flags outside. Lauren, divided family. Three of our kids are Cubs fans. I'm a diehard Sox fan.
Mm.
Scott and I, we are both Red Sox fans. Sympathies, I know to all. Now, Phil Davis brings up an interesting decision here. Phil Davis is down in Atlanta.
Uh-huh.
And we all know how, and the Braves had an amazing comeback last night, and my kids are
Okay,
Braves,
with the Phillies, right?
but the Phillies. So
Yeah.
we're kind of like, I'm in between. I'll root for the Braves for the sake of the kids. Um, I may root for the Phillies because I have to keep a certain amount of stuff in the house, going for.
Mm.
Mark Merrill Cass is a lifelong Mets fan.
Yes.
Um, and
Yankees and
then
Mets has
I
always
see
been.
I see Kathy Bono go Phillies. I had a conversation yesterday. I mean, I love the city of Philadelphia. I love a lot of places. It's very hard when you're a New York fan to go through what you're going through right now. So I just take my leave from other things. But the main thing, but this is a common thing. And again, this is another way to portray yourself when you're going out and having conversations in networking events. It's something we all have in common as an allegiance to a team or something. I think that's a great icebreaker,
Yeah,
for sure.
yeah. I think um, y- I used to look around at whoever I interview, the interviewer's office,
Hmm.
and look around for common ground, and to be able to have some kind of small talk, because small talk is something I think is still valuable in those first couple of minutes to kind of break the ice, to at least see what kind of person it is. I mean, you get those who won't, but
Right.
a lot of people will. And that, I think that's a vital part of the dynamic, because you want them to imagine working with you for 8 hours.
And that brings up a good point because when you're in the workplace, there are different conversations with different teams and different things,
Yeah,
for sure. So I think that's a good part of it. But for me, the biggest challenge was when I worked, having to explain to people what I did, not just to my best friend or I was to my wife, and um, I could explain the company, but I think the only thing that actually resonated with them is I explained the products.
yeah,
When I worked at UPS, I would say to them, you know how there's different types of shipping that goes out, whether it's next day, second day, whatever. Well, I'm involved in, which is true. I was involved in the process to roll that out to other countries in other
yeah,
ways because we were domestic at the time. So that made sense. Now, I had such a small part in that again, it might not make a difference to most people, but it was something I could use to explain what I did in a way that made sense.
yeah. And I think that's something that's a work in progress, right? I don't think you ever really arrived at one explanation of what you do. Ultimately, unless you're elected official, then
Right.
you better have the same company line. But I think, yeah, I think is really critical to understand and continue to work on how to present yourself in a very clear manner that's going to resonate a little bit more, even if it's just changing around words, but to really put some thought into impact on contact, so to speak, when it comes to describing yourself, and not just saying that I have this kind of title. These days, titles, um, there's several ways to describe one particular skill,
Hmm.
and it depends on what industry you are, of course. But I think people who work in the military have had this problem for many years when they come from working in the military, and they work in these very, very small, narrow niches of skills that the regular public has no idea. They have a hard time explaining what that actually is in civilian speak.
Right.
And I think when we come from a company, you could say the company's like a military. You may do this one thing for the company that everybody in the company knows what it is, but you being able to explain to everybody else is going to be really key to start to have the right kind of conversations in interviews, or to have somebody call you in. And I don't talk a lot about resumes, but it does the conversation is going to start with your resume, or it's going to start on LinkedIn, and you've got to be able to, in both cases, whether you use the same verbiage or not, it's got to be really clear that people can connect with what you do from the time they contact your headline and about section to the time that they actually want to talk to you.
I know one thing which I've been thinking about, a lot of us are going to Halloween type parties and things. We all want to get into costumes and things. Um, and I'm going to one for the first time in a while. So rather than thinking about struggling too much, I decided I'm going to go as a coach,
Mm-hmm.
which, but I'm going to be as a LinkedIn coach. So I'm going to dress up as a football coach,
Okay.
and then I'm going to have a clipboard, which is going to be like what I might use at an event, and then I'm going
Mm-hmm.
to have a cap, which is going to have LinkedIn on it. Now I say that not because I want like woohoo and I don't win the money like for best costume, but if you go to a costume party or something and you can dress up in what you're looking to do, or dress up in a way that kind of promotes you, a visual thing like that might be very helpful. You know,
Absolutely.
and it's a different way to look at it. Like, and instead of trying to be like the costume of the week or like Taylor Swift or something, It's just another. I know it's another thing to think about.
Right, right. Yeah. I think when people are, I think there needs to be an alignment though. Even though I think that's what people do in the workplace. They do. They put on a costume, so to speak. It may not necessarily be clothes, but their mindset is that that these are my borders and these
Hmm.
are the places where no one will cross, and I can go all in on the work or whatever I've already projected. And I think that's good if you stay true to that. Once you break that, other people are going to start to be more curious, not always in a positive way about what you are. And that's why I think, I'd rather somebody take more time to be thoughtful in the way that they are presenting than they are worrying about just getting their name out there. Like you've said, people, I don't know anybody who wins yet who just got their name out there and just threw their resume out there haphazardly, unless they had an inside connection. That might be the only way, but most people don't. Probably
Right.
about 99% of people won't have that on the outset. But it just takes some time, and I think to have those conversations. And I think why when you get into different situations, and you have to look at yourself and your career and your trajectory and what you do for it to align, you have to be in different scenarios, to be in the networking conversations, to be in like your industry organizations, and be involved in those committees so you can hear how other people have aligned themselves. And that will force you to start to have that kind of clarity that you need. Other than, yeah, we got to do the strength finders test. We've got to have, we got to have the reviews, performance reviews that tells us what our numbers are. Hopefully, I know a lot of people don't get that either, but that's just, for a lot of people who do.
Right.
But to take in all that information, all that matters in ultimately what that first person that's going to really matter is going to really resonate with.
I know in every workplace, in every situation, there's always one person that does one specific task. If you're doing a collection in the office, there's one person that does that. If
Mm,
if there's going to be a party or something, someone's going to do the sign up sheet. And
mhm.
so it's just as much about having that niche, whatever that niche is, so that people know to come to you for that, whatever it is. And it can be anything. You may not even know what it is at first until you really think and say, why are people always coming to me for this, whether it's
Mhm.
advice or something else? And then that becomes part of what you do. Sometimes it's an internal discussion you have to have.
Absolutely. Something I've used this phrase for some years now, but I think it's really true. You've got to be able to be the employee's job
Can you repeat that, because you're coming in and out a little bit with the video?
description. As I was saying, people need to think of themselves as the prescription to the employer's job description. In other words, what solutions you actually offer, you actually execute, and they impact everyone, including your work, whether you save money, you save time,
Mhm.
you create value, you save your boss's time, which could be a really big plus in the long run. But all of those things, you know, talk in terms of solutions, don't talk in terms of duties. I think when we talk in terms of duties, we're more involved in the minutia of our jobs. It's sort of the difference between working in your business and working at your business. There's a big difference, right? When you're working at your business or you're working on the business, you are actually creating value and profit. You're working uh, in it. You're doing the things that kind of that that the work produces but it's not necessarily scaling or making profit. In the same way, when you're bringing solutions, you are actually bringing something that's showing value and where people are getting value, and that's going to perk the ears of everybody you come in contact with, not just an employer, but somebody you network with who's going to be interested in more of what you have to say, who might be able to help you in the long term.
Absolutely. And sometimes, a lot of times when people talk, they talk in terms of a task list. These are all the things I did at my job. Instead of thinking that about that one comment that you made one time at that one meeting or whatever, that kind of escalated into a really great solution. And at the time, you may not have realized it, but then you go back in hindsight. You know,
Yeah.
you mentioned the one thing. Um, I think it's important. Sometimes you don't realize what it is until it's till afterwards, and I think that's why it's so important for managers and like to make sure that they acknowledge accomplishments along the way because it's sometimes you're too close to the situation.
Yeah. If you don't know, you should ask your boss. Say, how do I, what do I have to, the things that I do on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, how does that impact business? And let them tell you and use that as data and a way to, again, to help, bring more value to everybody else that you're going to help in the future, and for to inform your thoughts in a way that you'll be able to explain, say, hey, this is what I do, this is how it impacts business, and this is how it's really a game changer. And you could think this way, that if I didn't do it, it won't get done. And
Right.
tougher business won't happen unless I do these things that will happen. Now, there might be other people that do the same thing you do. Let's say you work in a call center and the 15 of you have the same impact. Well, then how is there something special that you do that nobody else does amongst those 15 people? And you can lead with that kind of thing. You can lead that, and that can be in a very short, uh, I hate to use elevator pitch, but that's what people still do. But I also think too is there's a lot of value in being able to dwindle that 15, that 30-second elevator speech into a 15-second speech, in the sense that
Right.
you're just concentrating on the solution and the value, and because ultimately that's what people care about. They
Right.
don't care about the other things that might be internally, that mean a lot to you, but it's something that's unique to yourself.
So I do want to do a couple of shout outs. Meryl brought up
Okay.
Marisol Maloney, who I had as a guest a while ago, and I want to give her a shout out too because I work with a lot of people at LHH who are veterans, and I'm
Mhm.
looking at their resumes, and they they don't. It's hard for them to take those skills that they did as in the military and make them relevant to what they're doing now. And it's and in some ways there's a way to position it, and they just don't know how. Whether it's they're not getting all the right coaching or they're not, but I think it's so important to really look at everything you've done in your life, everywhere, whether you're working or not working. Sometimes in transition, you do a lot of things that take more effort than when you're actually working, and then really doing that list
Yeah.
because sometimes it's the things you don't realize that make the biggest difference. And as Marisol said, which is true, ask your bosses and immediate supervisors for feedback. And feedback means both good and bad. I want to know or wanted to know when I was working what the issues were, whether I agreed with them or not. At least it would give me some clarity. Maybe it was the way I was coming across, maybe it wasn't what I was saying, maybe I was over communicating, but I'd rather know it than not.
Right. Yeah, we were talking earlier, y- you know, and not just military, but I think federal workers, they have their own world,
Right,
because because it's a little bit different for them to find a job in the federal world. Well, because one, when we talk about resumes, they want to, whenever you apply to the federal government for the first time, they want to know everything. And
Yes.
even when you go along, so you can have a resume that could be 2 pages long, or you could have one that's even 15. I've seen one 25 years, 25 pages long. And, this was when I was uh, going to federal bases doing job training for those who are transitioning from one base to another back about 10, 12. I guess it's been 13 years ago when I first started that. But, um, you know, they want to know everything. So the trick is for you to be to provide value throughout your all of those. Every page has to be worth reading, but they want to know everything, even from the time that you did some things before you got in the military and every duty. They want to know everything, even if it's just for one position. And I believe that, what happens is when people have been in for 15, 20, 25 years, and they're used to doing that, they don't know how to bring everything now in a way where they have to come to civilian world, that they've got to be a lot more concise, and they've got to concentrate so much on their results and accomplishments and achievements. And it's not that you get recognized for those things. Those are the things that actually have, that employers on the outside, that's what they're going to really care about. So when you say that you handled and refilled equipment that required, to order from Germany to U.S., uh, the cost of $65 million a year, that says something. And they don't understand it. And I just made that up, by the way.
Right.
But I'm just saying, numbers and percentages, um, they bring a lot of clarity or intrigue to ask. The next question is going to help you get on the road to a lot more interview success. Um, and if I could say so myself, in the sense of how people should be interviewing, they need to think of themselves as consultants more so than they are a novice. The days of I'm just trying to find a job says something a lot more different than I want to use these specific skills and understand how my skills impacted where I've worked, and how they were such a huge differentiator throughout my career, then I've been able to move forward in that kind of way. So I think
Mhm.
it even changes the narrative in how you talk about it. So when people think about consultants, when you're a consultant, you're thinking specifically about how to make something better, and how to make something better for a long period of time, if not for good. And
Right.
that's what's going to really help employers, or that's going to capture the attention. May not always get you hired, but it brings you a whole lot more closer than if you are a novice and saying, I need a job for X, Y, and Z personal reasons, because nobody who's interviewing doesn't care about your personal reasons for having a job. They care about what the value is for them, and how that's going to look for them to manage you on a daily basis.
Yeah, I think a big part of it is people have a certain mindset now how to do this. You have a job, you apply online, you wait for feedback, you don't get feedback, and there's different nuances to it. It's people to people. I think I'm looking at a resume, and sometimes I see things that are buried on the bottom, and I'm like, why is this buried on the bottom? No
Yeah.
one is going to see it, but you might as well put it front and center. It could be fluency in multiple languages. It could be some other accomplishment. Could be some other project. I mean, again, you want to make it everything. You want to portray yourself in the best way possible. You want to give yourself every opportunity, use everything in your arsenal, if you will, or in your toolbox, whatever it is, to put yourself in the best light.
Yeah, I think when people don't know enough about the employer is where it is truly a hit or miss. They don't have the background information if you're not researching the employer, researching the job, researching your boss or your future boss, or even researching, just finding out who's on your team and how you can fit into the team. All that's info. If you were to use like military terms, intelligence, for you to find out how you can contribute. I think when people, again, people go through in a lot of ways like it's the draft, like it's a sports draft, that
Uh-huh.
they did this work and now they're just waiting to be chosen. When actually you could, if you reverse engineering it, you choose the company, you choose the team, but you let them know how you can help them specifically. Uh, is like baseball or football, any other. There might be three guys that are also trying out for shortstops, but are you the one that hits home runs? Or are you the guy that may not hit a whole lot of home runs, but you haven't made an error in 2 years in your
Mhm.
league? That makes all the difference in the world. So, those are that's the specific intel that you should try to find. You won't always be able to find it, but if you can, you should try and start to have those conversations and do what you can. People cannot get chosen just for the fact that you had done something for 20, 25 years. I'm not saying that that needs to be a curse, but at least show that there's progression with that as well. How you've come to be, you know, a subject matter expert at X, Y, and Z, and what makes you valuable today in its relevance, as
Mhm.
opposed to that you just have the experience. It's all about the narrative.
As Linda brings up, job seekers have to look at it that you're interviewing the company, you're interviewing the hiring manager to make sure it works for you. I mean, it's a conversation, and it doesn't always work out. And sometimes you go, and I did this many times when I was in job search. I go on an interview. I wasn't necessarily the best qualified, but I wanted to learn about the company. I wanted to practice my interviewing skills. I wasn't wasting their time, like I wasn't going for a job and something I wasn't qualified for. But I still didn't know, I gave it a shot. And one of those times I actually got a job that way because it turns out that I had a conversation and was not about the job specs. So you just
Mhm.
never know.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I think interview once a year. If you're working at a job, you've been there a couple of years, it's time to interview. And it's time to find out what's relevant. Jobs, a lot of times when there's been turbulence or there's been, when a business has been stagnant, so does the technology becomes that way too because they're trying to get out of a rut. They're not looking forward. You could look forward by interviewing outside your company and find out what's going on in the marketplace. That's going to inform you to do one of two things: make possibly create more value and more conversations about how to you could find out, okay, it's time for me to get caught up because my job is behind. If not, it's just for pay. It's also for the fact that we're technologically 5 years behind everybody else, and that's not going to work for me in the long term. So all of those things are going to matter, but I think um, it is a lifestyle, as I've said many times. So job search is a lifestyle. Interviewing once a year is a part of that life thing that you ought to do because it is a skill. You if you don't use it, you lose it and you fall behind. And unfortunately, falling behind in technology by a couple of years is falling behind light years in actuality.
right.
So, those are things that, people need to be a lot more proactive and stop thinking that, that the longer you're there, the more you're going to benefit. That might be true in some cases, but for a lot of jobs, not so much because again, it's going to be about relevance. It's going to be about the narrative, the solutions you bring to the table, that you'll be able to explain it in a prescriptive manner, that you can look at something and see what they need as long as you have the right kind of intel. All those things are going to matter in the long run.
Well, I think that's a great way to end the conversation today, Mark. I appreciate it very much. I appreciate you taking time out from everything else. Sorry, it's so a couple of people go by. I'm surprised they want to join us, but that's okay. They were probably busy with their own stuff going on. Yeah. So I want to thank everyone for attending today. We'll be back next week. I want everyone to stay safe and have a great day, everyone.